Sometimes supernatural forces help us. In this episode, we will learn how. Welcome to Audio Stories of the Paranormal. You can always find us at www.theaudiostories.com. I'm J.B. Simeon. Thank you very much for joining me for this episode. If you believe that paranormal events deserve to be explored and shared, then the Audio Stories of the Paranormal is the show for you. New episodes are released weekly on Sundays. Some stories are true, some stories are fiction. You decide which is which. Okay, let's learn something. Our anonymous community member writes, I'm a U.S. Army private stationed in South Carolina. I used to hitchhike between my post and my hometown in Jacksonville, Florida. I always got rides, easy, because I had a gimmick. I would stand on the side of the road, holding a gas can next to a gas station. Based upon the gas can, people assumed that I had run out of gas, purchased some at that station, and was now in need of a ride back to my car. My situation rarely failed to elicit sympathy. In fact, that gas can was empty. It contained my shaving kit and some underclothing. When the people who picked me up discovered the truth of my situation, they often complimented me on being clever. Very few felt that they had been tricked. I got one ride that soon proved to be a mistake. When the driver discovered that I didn't need a ride to my car, he reacted like the other drivers. He complimented me on being clever. Then he asked me if I was clever enough to earn $50. He placed his hand between my legs to signal how he intended for me to earn the money. Despite the outrage that I demonstrated, some part of me was flattered and gave consideration to his request. However, I asked him to let me out. He immediately pulled over without protest. I got out of his car. I was stranded on the highway now, and it was getting dark. However, I felt that my gas can trick would soon convince another driver to pick me up. I was wrong. 2 hours later, it was a dark night, and at night all drivers are reluctant to pick up hitchhikers. I was getting cold, and it was going to rain soon. I was losing hope of getting a ride that night. I couldn't stay on the road, so unless a ride came along, I would have to look for shelter. The entire time I had been walking along the highway, I was hoping to make it to a roadside rest station and hang out in a warm restroom. Hours later, I was wet and cold. I was moving along the edge of the highway with my head down and my thumb out. I noticed in the distance a van stop on the side of the road ahead of me. It had its full-weight flashing lights on and the interior lights turned on. It was a lifesaver. I entered the van through the side door and sat down on the bench seat behind the driver and the passenger. There were only 3 of us in the van. The other 2 guys were just a little older than me. I thanked them for stopping and told them where I was heading. We drove for about 40 minutes while making small talk. They were very curious about who I was and why I was hitchhiking. Then the conversation dropped off and they started talking to each other. I must have taken a micro nap because when I woke up, I noticed that we were no longer on the highway. They apparently had taken a side road at some point. They assured me it was a shortcut and that we would soon be back on the highway. I relaxed a little. The guy in the passenger seat had earlier identified himself as David. The driver was called Mike. David asked me if I knew anything about revolvers. Since I was in the Army, I was familiar with the old .38 military police revolver. After I said I was, David pulled out a .45 caliber Colt revolver from the glove box and pointed it at me. He pulled the trigger and the hammer landed on an empty chamber. Stunned, I asked if he was crazy. I said, "You don't play with people like that." He and Mike just laughed at me. I got a knot in my stomach. I know it was going to get much worse. I wanted to get out of the van, but I had no idea where I was. David loaded the gun, filling each chamber with a round. Then he held it in his lap. Mike slowed the van and turned onto a dirt road. I asked, "Where are we going?" They didn't answer. David just turned in his seat and looked at me like I was his prey. He drove for a while on that dirt road through a swampy nighttime landscape. As Mike stopped the van, David held a gun on me and announced that we were going to play a game. Mike got out of the van and came around to the side door. It was the first time that I noticed that the side door could not be opened from the inside. I was panicked. Then I heard a voice next to me say, "Don't fight now. Wait." I thought it was David. Then I heard it again. "If you want to live through this, do everything I say." That voice was right next to my ear. I was sure that I had heard it because David told me to shut up. I hadn't spoken. Mike opened the side door. I was told to get out of the van. Once I was out, Mike, who now also had a gun, made me walk away from the van. I was directed to walk off the dirt road and into the swamp. The water was cold and it stank. I could feel odd things floating underneath the surface. I waded out until I was up to my waist. Then I was told to stop. The light from the van's headlights illuminated the area. I thought that I would next feel them shooting me in the back and the head. I was thinking that I never thought my life would end this way. Then I heard the voice say, "Start swimming." At the same time, the area went dark. The lights on the van turned off, and the van's horn was sounding as though it was stuck. I swam as fast as I could. I was expecting to feel the bullet strike me any second. The voice said, "Keep swimming." Then I heard the men firing their weapons in my direction. I heard the rounds striking the water but missing me. In the darkness, they couldn't see me. Also, because the van's horn was sounding, they could not clearly hear my movements. After a few minutes of swimming, I could feel land under my body. The voice said, "Get out of the water and run." I did. Then I heard the voice say, "Stop here. Lay down." It ordered me to be still as possible. I could hear David and Mike moving through the woods now. They were using a very bright flashlight to search for me. I was breathing hard. I was sure they could hear me breathing. I also had wounds from the thorn bushes that were acquired while I was running through the brush. My exposed skin itched and felt on fire. My breathing calmed. I lay still for what seemed to be hours, but was more likely just under an hour. I could hear the two men calling for me. They were saying it was all a prank. They wanted me to come to them. They promised that we would get out of there and they would take me to Jacksonville. I heard the voice say against my ear, "Get up." It instructed me to move forward with stealth, as quietly as possible. As I moved, the sounds of the two men became more distant. The voice guided me through the swamp that night and through the early morning. I walked for a distance in one direction. Then it instructed me to turn left or right when necessary and continue on a different route. As the sun came up, I found myself at the back of a highway rest station. The voice said, "Wait here in the woods." So I hid in the woods until I observed a state patrol vehicle stop there. Then I was able to get help. Over the months since this happened, I've thought about this situation constantly. Before that night, I'd never heard that voice. It was unfamiliar to me. I haven't heard it since that night. I don't pretend to know who or what the voice was. I don't know why it saved me, or I can't even say why it was worth saving. I'm just so grateful that it helped me when I needed it most. Somehow, it turned off those lights on the van and sounded the horn to help me escape those crazy men. Then it guided me to safety. Sometimes I think it was an angel. Other times I think it was the ghost of one of their victims because there has to be more than me. I'm sure that it was more than something inside of me. David told me to shut up when the voice first whispered into my ear. He heard it too. Of course, I don't hitchhike anymore. However, I still believe in the goodness of people. I just don't believe that I'm invincible. I was not able to give the police enough information to capture David and Mike. They're still out there somewhere on the highway looking for more victims. I expect to see them everywhere. We'll take a small commercial break here, and when we return, we'll learn about an unexpected encounter a U.S. Army unit had in Florida with a legendary creature. This is a story from another anonymous community member, and it's in our back catalog called Hi, Hi, Hi. In the early 1980s, Sam Bowie was a staff sergeant in the United States Army. He was assigned to a long-range reconnaissance company. During a field exercise deep inside a Florida swamp, he had an encounter with the paranormal that changed his life. Sam's Army Ranger Company was conducting a 3-day land navigation exercise in the swampy terrain of Eglin Air Force Base in the state of Florida. The countryside that they navigated through was very difficult terrain in which to keep one's correct location during daylight hours. Therefore, it was more difficult for a small team of 5 men, called a patrol, to navigate the swampy terrain at night. On the second night of the exercise, the men were 2 hours into the third leg of their movement, and they were lost. They located a small island just big enough to hold the team above the water level of the swamp. Climbing on their hands and knees, they got out of the water onto the darkness of the island. They checked the muddy ground for snakes and alligators using the night vision scopes mounted on their assault rifles. Then they removed their heavy rucksacks and lay down to recover their strength. Sam pulled out a map and attempted to locate the island on it. The entire team noticed that a strong smell of urine, feces, and decaying flesh inhabited the island. Seconds after turning on a flashlight to check out the ground, team members made a gruesome discovery. Discarded, partially consumed animal body parts were spread around the small island in various stages of decay. Some of the parts were fresh, and others had long ago been consumed. There were also numerous piles of fresh feces. It appeared the island was the nest of some very large predatory animals. The team had arrived while the predators were away. Sam was still attempting to locate their position on the map when they all heard something very large splashing through the water towards the island. All the red lens flashlights were turned off upon hearing the sounds of movement. The men used their night vision scopes to scan the swamp in the direction of the sound. In the green vision of the scope, they could see what appeared to be 2 enormous King Kong-like gorillas or bears approaching the island. When the patrol had approached the island, the water level had been up to their chest. Some of the men were 6 feet in height. Looking through the night vision scopes at the 2 gorillas or bears, the water level was between their waist and knees. They were very tall for gorillas or bears, about 10 to 12 feet in height. The soldiers believed that they were observing 2 escaped zoo animals or pets that had been released into the wild. People did that all the time in Florida. A few ranger teams had encountered a large anaconda on a past exercise. At that point in time, the only place the men had ever seen a gorilla was on TV. They had no realistic idea of correct gorilla proportions. However, the closer the pair got to the island, the less gorilla or bear-like they appeared to be. A powerful stench assaulted the men's nostrils. It was much stronger than the stench of the island. While still looking through the night vision scope, someone on the team exclaimed in a whisper, "Fuck, those are Bigfoots." Instinctively, as quietly as possible and while still laying on the ground, the team formed a skirmish line facing the perceived threat. As they had practiced many times, they moved their backpacks between them and the oncoming creatures to create cover and support for their weapons. The Bigfoots were close enough now to be seen without electronic aids. The team only had blank ammunition for their M16 assault rifles. The weapons were worthless if the Bigfoots attacked. Sam took the pin flare gun out of his breast pocket and fired off a round to illuminate the area. When the Bigfoots heard the pop of the pin flare, they froze, half squatting in the murky water. The flare illuminated the area like daylight for about 40 seconds. The Bigfoots watched the flare arc, then descend to the surface of the water. The sudden illumination had halted their progress toward the island. It had also temporarily destroyed the team's night vision. It must have also destroyed the night vision of the creatures because they didn't move long after the flare had landed. Not knowing what to expect from the Bigfoots and fearing the worst, Sam chose to retreat. He shouted, "Westport," the code word for the team to move to the last designated rally point. In this case, the team would move due west until they encountered the first dirt road. Sergeant Morales, the assistant team leader, pulled out his compass and took up a heading of 270 degrees magnetic. He plunged into the water on the other side of the small island. The team followed him one by one into the water. Sam, as the team leader, brought up the rear. He needed to ensure that no men or equipment was left behind. The men moved through chest-high water for hours toward the dirt road. On the movement to the road, several times they halted and just listened. They could hear the creatures moving behind them and talking to each other. When the creatures realized that the patrol had stopped moving, they would also stop. However, then they made sounds like they were calling out to the patrol. It sounded like one of them was saying, "Hi, hi, hi." Sam believed that they would attack at any moment. The creatures could easily have caught the team if they wanted. After a while, he was sure that they were just curious. Upon reaching the dirt road, the team set up a defensive perimeter and took out their field knives for protection. They used the radio to call for an extraction. While they waited, the team could hear the sounds of one of the creatures shouting to them, "Hi, hi, hi." Hours later, a helicopter landed on the road to extract them. As the helicopter circled around in the air to take up its course, the men could see the two Bigfoot creatures through the trees below. They were looking skyward at the helicopter and using their hands to shield their vision from the sun. For a few minutes, the helicopter crew and the team circled the area looking at the creatures in disbelief. Then the Bigfoots moved into a denser part of the swamp and disappeared. In the operations debrief, the men were separated. However, each man still managed to relate with accuracy the story of their encounter with the Bigfoot creatures. The report was stamped confidential by the commander. For weeks after the incident, each time someone on the other ranger teams made a mistake, they would claim it was because they were chased by Bigfoot. They turned the whole story into a joke. No one on the team wanted to talk about it after that. 3 months later, on another field exercise to Eglin, a different team of rangers encountered the island that Sam's team had discovered that night. This time, it was during daylight hours. The team discovered classic Bigfoot prints all over the muddy island. They took photographs of the prints. The photographs hung in the company's offices for years. The area was closed off from access by the military police and the federal game wardens. There were rumors that some large bears were captured by the wardens and released elsewhere. After a few days, the area was opened again. 2 years later, Sam wrote a fictionalized article for Boy's Life magazine about his team's encounter with the Bigfoot creatures. After much reflection, he had become obsessed with the idea that the Bigfoots were attempting to communicate with the team that night. He thought that the hi, hi, hi sounds the team heard the Bigfoots make were actually English. Could it be possible they were saying hi? Watching the TV show Star Trek had convinced Sam that he had blown a first contact opportunity. The theme of his article was how fear had destroyed the opportunity to explore and learn. If given a second chance, he promised himself he would use it to expand his knowledge. After Sam retired from the Army, he searched for Bigfoot creatures all around North America. He disappeared one weekend in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. The park rangers located his campsite. There were Bigfoot footprints all over the ground. There was also a tripod with a camera mounted on top. Most of the people who have seen the images developed from that camera believe it's all staged. They think that Sam is somewhere having a joke on everyone. However, the men who were in his old ranger team looked at the photos and said, "That son of a bitch made contact." They suspect Sam will turn up one day to tell us what his life was like living with Bigfoot. Okay, you paranormals, that ends our stories. Thank you to all the community members who shared your experience in this episode, and thank you to everyone who joined us in this exploration of the paranormal. If you all have a comment on any of the experiences shared, or you want to share your own paranormal experience, please email me at feedback@theaudiostories.com or go to www.theaudiostories.com and post a reply in the contact form on the home page. Before we end this episode, I'm inviting all listeners to visit the Audio Stories of the .com merchandise store. There's a link to the store on the home page and in the show notes of this episode. At the merch store, you will find high-quality audio stories merchandise. Your purchase will not only provide you with really cool stuff, it will also provide us with the means to keep producing the audio stories of the paranormal show each week. So please visit and spend generously. You are our main source of support. This concludes the episode of Audio Stories of the Paranormal. Thank you again to everyone who shared your experience with the community. Thank you again for all joining us. I hope you have enjoyed the experience and that you will join us again next week for a new episode. Until then, please remember to be aware, be cautious, and take care.